Okay, today I want to talk about how do we return an athlete to loading. So let's say somebody had either a back injury or maybe back surgery, or we're going to talk about specifically spinal loading. So think about that low back. This could be, hip as well, but for the general purposes, we're going to talk about the back. So some people are load intolerant. That means that their symptoms are worse when they're upright against gravity or they add load to themselves. So when we think about weightlifting, that obviously is adding load and making gravity or us having to work harder against gravity. So I have Tiffany here. She's going to be my demo. We're going to talk about going from a vertical load sequentially and progressively into more of a horizontal load. So for somebody like Tiffany, if we were going to start to load her, let's pretend that she's load sensitive. The first thing that I would do is obviously make sure that she's doing really well with all of our base phases of rehab, but when it comes to loading, we'd start in a vertical position. So I would have taught her already how to probably pick something up. So I'm going to have her carefully pick up this load, and we're just going to have her, she's holding two 18-pound kettlebells, and just see if she can stack her spine. So Tiffany, turn to the side, face that window for me if you would. And if you see, she's nice and vertical. So now I'm just putting these vertical forces through her, just kind of going through the low back and the discs and all this, the spine and hips, knees, etc. So this is really good. From here, we can, if that feels okay, we can even have her walking. And that just introduces a little bit of dynamic motion to that, okay? Good. I like to start off with a double, which is what we call a farmer's carry, because of it essentially gives a centralized force down the middle. And the next option here is we can even put one of them down. So why don't you put one of them down for me? And if she is holding a unilateral force, this shifts the center of mass over slightly. The reason that we don't start with this is the shear forces on the low back are a little bit higher. So it's just something that we want to take into consideration. Some of our PT, algorithms that we're running in our head kind of lead into, well, how many forces am I putting through things? Let's start bilaterally, and then we can go unilaterally. And again, she's still upright against gravity. Next from here, if we want to start getting into these larger movement patterns, I'd have her bring it up into the front, into like a goblet hold. And then Tiff, why don't you turn to the side? I'm going to have you do a reverse lunge. So she's going to do a reverse lunge for me and then pause at the bottom. You can just kneel all the way down. So here, she's going to be doing this movement, this lunge movement, which we know is great for the legs, but she's also, as it comes into her spine, she's still staying vertical. And then come on back up, and then switch legs for me. Good, and then come on back up. And you can bring that kettlebell back down. So now we're progressing the movements for the lower leg, a little bit more complex, but we're still keeping her vertical. This is important. What kind of forces can the spine tolerate? If it can tolerate vertical loading, we can check that box. Next, we're going to start putting into motion some forward lean by introducing the goblet squat. So go ahead, turn to the side. She's going to hold that kettlebell right up in front of her. Go ahead and drop down into the bottom part of a squat for me. Good, and as she's here, her spine is in a great position, so that's a big check mark for us. And she's leaning forward a little bit. Go ahead and drive back up for me. So a front squat or a kettlebell goblet squat is going to have a little bit more of an upright position than, say, a back squat, which we'll get into in a second. Again, if somebody can go through a session and feel really good after doing that, not just here, but then also as part of their home exercise program, we can say, okay, they can take a little bit of forward inclination. Of course, we're monitoring reps and load as we go and volume as we go. But can they tolerate a little bit more forward inclination? If the answer is yes, we can go to the next step. So go ahead and put that down for me carefully. I'm going to have Tiffany grab a barbell for this next part, and we're going to talk about the back squat. And so Tiffany's going to walk out, and again, turn sideways to the camera, please. Great. And then Tiffany, go ahead and drop down into a back squat for me. So here, because she's got that weight on her back, it's going to push her even more forward. Great. And then go ahead and stand back up. Does that feel okay? Give me one more rep. And if you go back and we were to compare this into that goblet squat a few seconds ago, she should be more inclined forward. Go ahead and stand back up. Great. Why don't you bring that bar to the front? Same thing. If somebody can tolerate some moderate loading over time and they're not having any increase in symptoms, then we say, okay, they can tolerate that more forward inclination. But sometimes, as much as we want to kind of take our back patients into a hinge, which would be more of like a deadlift, sometimes it's actually the last thing that they're most tolerant to. So the last movement that we're going to go over is the deadlift. And so Tiffany, go ahead and drop down into the bottom position for a deadlift. And here you can see she's a whole lot more horizontal. Her back position's still fantastic. Everything looks good and safe. Good, come on back up and come down one more time. But it's so much more of a hip dominant movement. Great, and then come on back up. And then you can put that bar back in the rack if you want, or you can put it down. But it's so much more of a hip dominant movement that we have to hinge forward. And now our low back is fighting those forces. The gravity is trying to break us this way. And she did such a good job of holding here. And for some patients, that forward inclination to that extent is a lot. Even if we just use a PVC pipe, even if we use a 9 or 13 pound kettlebell, even if they just are picking up something really light at home, that forward hinge can be tough. So if we work them into it slowly over time, light load, moderate load, low volume, higher volume, and go through this progression and check the box as we go, we know that we can progress them back to doing all kinds of lifts safely. And all these lifts will also translate into better function around the house, better function in daily life, and a huge impact for our weightlifting athletes and CrossFit athletes. So just something to think about. This is something that we think about with all of our athlete progressions, especially when it comes to the spine. What are they tolerant to? How do we intelligently design the program so that we are testing them all the way along the way and the progressions make sense in terms of that load and hinge tolerance to their spine?